All right, everybody. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and checking out our We the Governed kind of the live stream that we have tonight. I know this looks like a different set, and it is. We're trying out a little different look here at We the Governed. So hopefully, I'm always interested in your feedback and your comments. So if you love it or you hate it, let me know. Make some comments down below. And this is an Ask Me Anything show, as most of our live streams are. So if you have any questions you want to ask, make sure you put those in the comment section, and I will be able to get to them as you post them up here. If you can remember, just because it stands out better with the comments, make sure you say @WeTheGovern. It makes it a little bit easier for me to pick out the questions. And again, questions are a lot easier to respond to than comments. So, but I am interested in any comments you might have about the studio. I think this is a little bit more, a little bit clearer for people who are tuning in and looking at the live stream, and I think it should make the interaction just a little bit better. So I hope that you like this new approach. I think this is one we're going to try for a while, and in fact, I'm going to probably be doing some of my videos in this format as well. So hopefully that works pretty well for you as well. One of the things I want to talk about is if you've been paying attention to, I know I did a little short on this earlier, but I've been trying to catch up on a lot of the serial violators of Washington State's campaign finance laws, and I've been filing some complaints at the PDC. And so there's been a lot of complaints that have posted lately. There's many dozens and dozens more that have yet to post, but they will soon. And I'm usually able to get in, I don't know, 6 to 8 complaints a day. It really varies. Sometimes I don't get that many in. If I've got a lot of projects around the property, or I'm dealing with family stuff, but I can usually fit it in when I'm at a coffee shop. Somebody shows up late for a meeting, I can usually get a pretty good complaint set up. So I've been pretty busy just trying to catch up. I've probably another 100 and 120 more to go before I catch up on some of the known violators that I just should have probably been filing complaints on a while ago. And I only reference that because it's just become something that's very easy for me to do. And I always encourage people to be more active and involved civically in government one way or the other. And you find something that you are interested in or that interests you, and find a way to try to be a subject matter expert, or try to become, find something that interests you so that you can pay attention to it. And what happens is, I think once you go down that rabbit hole and you become you become an expert, or at least an amateur expert anyway, on whatever it is that you're doing, I think you're going to have a bigger impact in being able to change the outcome of how that part of government's operating, or you're going to be able to change the trajectory of maybe what that agency's doing, or that school board, or that city council's doing in your community, just by really becoming more familiar with how it operates. I like I'm engaged in the Public Disclosure Commission process really because of some experiences I had back in late 2016, early 2017, and it really motivated me to get more involved at the time. And that's kind of carried forward to today. I never thought I'd be the guy who's filing lots of PDC complaints, and yet here we are. So the one thing I will point out to you is there's a couple of very interesting complaints, at least from my perspective, that I filed that are significant violations that are a little bit above the norm. A couple of them have to do with the fact that it appears to me that some of the entities, like the WEA, which is the Washington Education Association PAC, and to a lesser extent, I think the SEIU, which is another union PAC, SEIU 775, and a couple of these other groups that I've caught breaking the law, they're pretty substantial. I mean, they're really fairly large and significant violations, mostly with the WA, and a lot of, I believe, the Kitsap County Democrats, Grays Harbor Democrats, Pierce County Democrats, Whatcom County Democrats, a lot of them, they've been concealing a massive amount of information from the public during the election period, and then they kind of try to catch up, and they'll file these late reports of the information they concealed during the election period, but maybe after the election, or sometimes years later. And there were a variety of large PACs and basically county parties and ledge district groups and some politicians as well that were breaking the law and substantially hiding it from the public. If they can hide it from the public with no consequences, then what's the point of having a campaign finance law, right? Everybody would just do that, which unfortunately looks like almost everybody has been doing it. So that's the purpose of my complaints. Now, if you look at some of the complaints that I have filed with the Public Disclosure Commission, one thing you're going to notice is that in order to find a late report, you have to know when the report was due in the first place, and then you have to look at when it was actually filed. And the length of time between those dates, that's like a measurable time that the PDC staff, they tend to measure that as increasing significance or decreasing significance of the violation. So if you're years or months out and you took a bunch of money from some special interest, or you spent a bunch of money on an ad that you concealed from the public for months and months, that increases the significance of that violation, and you've essentially not paid attention to the campaign finance laws, and you hid that information from the public. And so that's kind of the balancing act that the Public Disclosure Commission staff theoretically goes through when they're measuring the quality of the violation. The way that I've submitted the spreadsheets, I try to show when the form was due to be filed with the Public Disclosure Commission. Then I show when it actually was filed, the difference in the number of days, and I kind of organize them by latest report down to least late report. And the reason for that is mostly for staff, Public Disclosure Commission staff, to make it easier for them to kind of prioritize the significance of the violations. But the other part that I've done this time, which is different than what I've done in the years past, is I have a direct link to the original document. And that way staff can go back and verify that the information I'm providing is accurate. It also serves as kind of a format for the violators themselves to go back and try to explain anyway to the Public Disclosure Commission why it is that they've decided to be so egregious with their campaign finance violations. So it's really about just trying to do the best job I can in documenting the violations, and it's just become so habitual for me now that I can actually do these pretty quickly. And part of it is you become so familiar with the statute and the way that things are supposed to be done that when somebody does something that's illegal or outside of the boundaries of the campaign finance laws, it just stands out. It's just easy to spot. It really stands out by itself. Part of it's just pattern recognition. Part of it's just knowing that this is how something should look, and then you see it later on. These spreadsheet complaints that I've been filing just recently, and I've got a bunch more to file, are probably the most complex to put together because you're really having to look at a whole bunch of different documents. And I don't anticipate that maybe somebody who's interested in doing something similar to what I'm doing, they're going to instantly come out of the gate doing these types of complaints. But if you're interested in doing something like this, you pretty much want to study the statute and try to memorize it, or you don't necessarily have to memorize it, but it helps if you have it memorized, or at least you got a significant familiarity with it that you're able to go back and reference and template complaints that you can actually file. So I filed a whole bunch of them. There's a ton there. You're going to see a lot of them posting up. I anticipate as it rolls forward, a lot of people should get fined or sanctioned by the Public Disclosure Commission. I mean, these are mostly pretty significant violations. It's probably overwhelming staff a little bit. I did testify at a hearing last week, and I think I'd mentioned that on my last live stream that I was going to go there and testify, and I can tell that they're probably having to shift a lot of their resources to deal with all the complaints that I filed, and that's the way it goes. So I anticipate that they'll probably have some kind of a triage approach to how they manage the complaint load, but there's going to be a lot of stories I think that come out of this, and probably we'll have a little bit cleaner election cycle coming up, I would hope. And if you are running a PAC or doing anything else like that, try to make sure you do a good job trying to follow the law. I realize that there are a lot of problems with Washington State's campaign finance laws. There's some parts of the law I disagree with, but I didn't write the law, and I do try to make sure it gets enforced, and perhaps this leads to further reform. Most of the reform that's happened in the last 8 years has been because of work that I've already done on it, and I'm sure that there'll be more coming. There's a question here about, let's see. There's a question here from Jason. Jason, it looks like you posted up two basic questions here. One question is, what are your thoughts on why there is a rise in home invasions in Seattle? And this is an interesting question, although it's basically probably fairly self-evident. There's a rise in home invasions in Seattle because the criminals believe that there's not going to be any consequences for the crime they commit. And home invasion allows you to go in and probably generate a substantial amount of return on what you can steal, or if you're just into victimizing people, I suppose that you're able to do it out of sight of everybody. Home invasions are just one of the worst crimes to experience, I think, if you're a victim, because a lot of people close their front door and lock it, and they think, okay, I'm safe, it's my home. And when somebody kicks that door in, or they come in and break in and while you're home, it's very traumatizing if you've ever talked to somebody who's gone through it. And it's terrifying to see that as an increase in crime that's going on. Our judges in our state have done a terrible job, basically, and the prosecutors in particular lately. When these criminals are being caught, they're being rapidly released back into the streets. I mean, they're not even having them post bail. They're not enforcing the law that exists, and so there's no penalties for these criminals to commit these crimes. And so, unfortunately, what you're going to see, as long as those types of judges are around, or the prosecutors have the attitude they do, is that they're going to substantially increase the number of crimes like this, and probably far worse moving forward. And, we're going back to this era of the 70s and 80s where we really did have a lot of crimes like this that were going on in Washington State as well as around the country. And this leniency towards violent criminals, prolific violent criminals, is a terrible it's a terrible policy approach, but it's also going to do nothing but produce just terrible results. So I think that's something that everybody should be aware of. You're going to see a lot more of that moving forward. And, that's going to be one of the problems that we see more and more. Jason, you had an earlier question here about what are your thoughts on the argument that the Clinton 1994 gun ban worked, but there's a state legislator making the argument at the same time it did not ban enough. And, remember, there was there were a number of different laws that were passed. Remember, it was under the Reagan administration, actually, that the first so-called, assault weapons ban was passed. And that was a total failure. It did nothing. And so it was rescinded. Eventually it went away. I didn't actually think that would come back, but of course, when it comes to government, usually the worst ideas stick around the longest, and no matter how incompetent they are, they seem to want to ensure that they keep repeating their incompetency time and time again, with just like a Marxist believing that true socialism's never been tried. They always believe that they can just keep doing it and making it worse. So anyway, it's a classic situation right now. Let's see, there's a great question here from Craig asking, what's the biggest crime our Washington state government does on an everyday basis? So when it comes to crimes that government commits, right, or at least the things that we would normally consider crimes, and remember, most of them, government, or at least a bureaucracy, is largely defined, at least the way I define it, is kind of an ocean of incompetence that conceals this mountain of corruption underneath. Or you could say a mountain of corruption concealed by an ocean of incompetence. That's probably the best definition I can come up with for the kind of the modern day bureaucracy and government that we have today. When you catch them doing something that appears to be completely corrupt, the first line of defense is to say, if you're a bureaucracy or a government employee or a politician, is to say, no, I'm not totally corrupt. I'm just egregiously incompetent. I can't do my job well at all. We see this in Hawaii, where there were a lot of people there who assumed that somebody in government was there to protect them, and then it turns out that incompetence is kind of the default setting of government. They will not go door to door knocking on your houses. They lied about that. They're going to blame it on climate change, right, rather than the poorly managed power lines that started the fire. They're going to deny the water, saying they're going to refuse to release the water to help the firefighting because of some esoteric and bizarre approach that some enviro had, or some other lefty that was in public office, and they aren't going to care about public safety. Unfortunately, this is kind of the default setting that most of the bureaucracy has today. It doesn't mean that every single person in the bureaucracy is a terrible person or a corrupt criminal. I mean, they aren't. But enough of them are that it degrades the quality of the service that you would get from government. And frankly, there's a whole bunch of areas of government, I think, that they are useless. And if we just eliminated them, most people wouldn't even notice. And so this is just an issue of how you deal with government. I think the biggest crimes that a government has, of course, is just convincing us that they're doing something or they're trying to help us when in fact they're trying to hurt us most of the time. And when I say that, what I really mean is that the nature of bureaucracy exists to perpetuate itself. So they don't. They exist mostly to perpetuate their existence. And how do you move up the food chain if you're a senior bureaucrat? You move up the food chain by having a bigger budget, more employees working for you, and you can justify both if you can increase the scope and abuse of the administrative state over which you're operating, so the laws and rules under which your agency operates. So if you can come up with excuses or justifications to increase the WACs or the RCWs in our state, Washington, or if you're at the federal level, increase the U.S. code rules and whatever Congress happens to pass, that gives your agency more and more latitude to expand its scope of operations, then as a bureaucrat, you can justify higher payroll. You can justify hiring more people and therefore a higher payroll. You can justify and explain when you hop over to a different agency. I started at this agency and the budget was $10 million, but when I left, it was $40 million. And so therefore that gives me more ability to jump into an agency with a $200 million budget, that kind of thing. So it's a very predictable human nature kind of thing. It isn't even, and it's not like some kind of evil conspiracy. It's just the nature of man and how things operate. And so I think that that's going to be something to remember, is that government's deception and desire to convince you that they're actually doing something helpful and useful, in most cases are wrong. Now, there's clear exceptions to this. When the firefighter department, when your firefighters come out and put out a fire or stop a brush fire from spreading to your property or something like that, clearly a tangible good. When they get rid of the weeds on the side of the road or pick up garbage, they're doing something tangible. They may be doing it super expensively, but at least they're producing something that works. When our Department of Transportation is capable of building a bridge that doesn't collapse on a regular basis, and that bridge actually lasts for a while, that's a value that they're providing, or at least the construction company that they've hired to put it in is a value. When your law enforcement operates and they're able to arrest those criminals and put them in jail and they don't get out to victimize you again in a couple days, that's a value provided to the community. When you can feel some level of confidence that if you go to court, the criminal's going to at least get a fair trial, and that if they're found guilty, that they're not going to come out again in the next couple days again, there you go. You can say that's a value you're getting from government. Unfortunately, what government has tended to do lately is throw away the functional key things that most of us would expect from government, like functioning legal system, rule of law, law enforcement, being able to actually function. And they're replacing it with goofy and esoteric, obscure things like school systems that have zero desire to actually teach kids anything useful. And instead they just indoctrinate them or downgrade the quality of the education to the point where it's kind of embarrassing that you're paying twice as much and getting half the value. Or they'll create something like the Puget Sound Partnership in our state, which is an entirely useless agency with no value at all. I mean, every single employee there could be fired tomorrow. The budget could be reduced to zero and no one would notice, except for the bureaucrats or perhaps some special interests that get some grants that get kicked back through them. Just useless agency. I mean, there's a bunch of them like that. So that's how government operates. And so they squander your resources. They make you give them the labor of your energy and time. They take that money from you by force, essentially, because if you don't give it to them, believe me, they'll get it. And they take that money and then they waste it, or they use it to hurt you. The Department of Ecology harms people every day. They decide to invent new rules to destroy farming or farmers, or to make your house 10 times more expensive than it needs to be. Whatever it is, there's all kinds of ways that government actually hurts you and doesn't help you. And so I do think that a lot of it's unsustainable. I had a video that I've produced, but it hasn't come out yet, that talks about, I think, the importance of transparency in government. But one of the messages that you see in there that's very common is that I think it's unsustainable. You bloat government to a certain point and the quality keeps dropping. Eventually, you reach a point where it's unsustainable and it kind of collapses under its own weight. And it's an ugly scenario to go through because there are key things like public safety and functioning road system and, the court system that works. You kind of want those things in a modern society to not fall apart. And yet those are the things that are under attack the most by kind of this leftist dogma that we see becoming the current fad of the day. It's not unusual, but it's unfortunate that's going on. Jason, you got a question here. I always get these gun questions. I related to my previous home invasion question, what guns would you recommend for home defense? Listen, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I'm not going to give people advice on it. Become familiar with whatever choice of self-defense you're going to use and be proficient with it. If you're going to have a shotgun for home defense, make sure you know how to use it. Be familiar with what a shotgun, how it actually feels and functions, especially in an enclosed environment. And remember, if you have different types of weapons you're using and you're going to have to defend yourself someday, pay attention to what's behind. I always think hunter safety classes are pretty good for this. Be aware of what's behind your target and just be aware of that. And hopefully you never get in a situation where you have to use it. But unfortunately, more people will because of the policies that we have right now. There was TZ had a question here about, I just read an article by Ari Hoffman in the Post Millennial on 22 counties suing Inslee for failure to provide behavioral health treatment required by law. That's a great point. I haven't read that article, and I love Ari's research and work that he's doing. I'll have to see which 22 counties actually did jump on that lawsuit. Behavioral health treatment has been, this has been probably one of the mistakes that the federal government made in the 80s when they shut down a lot of the mental health institutions. And part of the reason why they did this at the time was because of scandal stories that came out of the government's incompetence and failures and inhumane living conditions in some of these mental health facilities, and the reform was very difficult for them to get through. I think that they should have spent some time reforming it, and just shutting the whole thing down the way they did. Now, they kicked it down to the states, which is probably more appropriate than the federal government doing it anyway. But what's happened, like in Washington State, this is a great example. I mean, they've just... And this is a real interesting. Here's something where there has been a big difference between the Democrats and Republicans on mental health treatment in Washington State. Western State Hospital is kind of the main last mental health facility in Washington. It's just egregiously mismanaged at a scale that's just hard to. It's hard to imagine that's not even willful and purposeful. And I've talked to employees that work there, and they're so frustrated. It's got to be one of the more frustrating jobs you could ever have, especially knowing that the state's purposely making it impossible for you to do your job in any effective way. So because of the mental health, the approach the state has with mental health issues, their basic approach is just to release them on the street, let them go out and victimize as many more people as they can possibly abuse, always using mental health as the excuse. It's okay if you killed that person, provided you have a mental health problem. It's okay that you beat those people up or assaulted them or raped somebody. As long as you have a mental health excuse, then that's okay. They'll just keep putting you out on the street. This is terrible. It produces a lot of problems. It doesn't help the person that's got mental health problems in the first place, and more importantly, you're producing a lot of victims out there. Public safety should be a priority when it comes to dealing with mental health and crime. Surprising. That idea is pretty radical. I'm not sure there's any Democrat left in our state, at least in any significant position of authority, who believes that anymore. But it is a normal common sense approach that I think a lot of people still presume, regardless of your party affiliation, you think government's actually there to help you with those issues, and they aren't. And it's a terrible mess. And we have to find solutions for people that are genuinely mentally incapable of functioning in society without harming others or themselves. And throwing them into homeless camps or drug addict facilities or junkie camps and then letting them self-medicate is not the solution, as much as it appears to be the priority of people like Seattle or Olympia or Bellingham today. That's not going to be a functional solution moving forward. And it's probably the most expensive option you can have out there, because regardless of the cost of a mental health facility, and humanely and honestly treating people in a way to help some get better and some at least just protect the public from their predations. Whatever cost that is, that's nothing compared to the even higher cost of victimizing a bunch of people or going out and creating horrible conditions in public. It's just I don't think there should be any comparison to that. And it's funny because any bureaucrat that complains about cost, the couple things that they'll complain about, they'll always complain about the cost of transparency. They hate that. They won't complain about the cost of what it takes to pay themselves or run Taj Mahal buildings or anything like that. They don't mind that. But they do care about the cost of transparency, the cost of accounting, like tracking how they spend money. Boy, that's terrible. Public Records Act, terrible costs, right? All these things, even though they're microscopic fractions of the cost of those agencies, that's where they want to cut money because they want to reduce transparency. They sure don't want oversight, and they don't want to be compliant with anything. And so it's just and this is another one of these issues. So they don't want to have a good mental health system in the state. And so they'll complain about the cost of it, but at the same time, they'll spend $1 billion on treatment, or actually just flooding the zone with a bunch of grant grifting operations for homeless industrial complex. Not a rational approach, I don't think, to good government, and it's a real issue, and it's one that we have to really pay attention to. Let's see. There's a question here by Jason again. Will there be any electoral consequences for what happened in Hawaii, or will the mindless drones continue voting D? Well, one of the things out there in Hawaii, I'm not sure that the Republicans provide any alternative. So a bigger question is probably less about partisan affiliation and whether or not you're going to have any rational people run for office there. I mean, Hawaii does have some cultural issues. It's always been there. My uncle had a business there years ago, and I remember him telling me about this decades ago. About just, it's island time. There's a little bit of a sloppier, lazier approach to things like infrastructure, being on time, doing things right, so that can translate into really terrible public service situations. Remember, it was Hawaii just a couple years ago where they accidentally sent out on the text messaging program a notification that there was a nuclear attack on the island, and then people were panicking, and it was just chaos on the island. And in Hawaii, they didn't even fire the guy; they just simply removed him and then put him in a different position. Probably got paid more. No matter how incompetent and disastrous you are as a bureaucrat, no matter how much harm you inflict on society or how useless you are, they just want to reward you. And rewarding incompetence like that is not going to produce government that's at all representing what you and I would probably want to live in. And yet that's how, at least especially in Democrat jurisdictions, they'll do it. And don't think they don't do it in Republican jurisdictions too. But in these Democrat jurisdictions, they do terrible things. And of course, the more we learn about the fires on Maui, the more we realize that government incompetence really had a substantial overlap of disastrous decisions and sometimes even willful decisions, failure to release the water, lying about their efforts to evacuate when in fact they put up blockades that if people followed those blockades, a lot of them died. People who ignored the government and took off and went around the blockades, they were the ones that survived. Also, lying then after the fact, claiming you went around door to door when you didn't, refusing to issue warning sirens, lying about it being climate change when it's actually some of the power lines clearly had problems and they helped start the fires. Refusing to let people clean the woods or the fields out so that there's less combustibles to basically produce more fire. Listen, I own timber property. This is just plain common sense. If you own property like that yourself around your house, try to clear it up so there's less stuff around your place that can burn your place down. There's some of these common sense things. And of course, common sense is nowhere to be found in government, but it gets worse the more left-leaning I think that government becomes, or the big overweening kind of approach that they have. This is particularly troubling in Maui because they were well notified long ago about the problems with fires getting out of control. And so anyway, there's just... It's kind of a mess, and I don't know what the electoral consequences, if any, are going to be out there. But you can find people with common sense. Sometimes terrible disasters like this are what produce common sense people coming out of the woodwork, realizing that I just can't outsource my security or freedom to whatever clown happens to come out of the woodwork and run that government agency. So that's definitely an issue. Jason, you had a question here about the thoughts on the Andy Ngo trial verdict. And actually, there were two different verdicts in that case. For those who don't know, Andy Ngo was a journalist down in Portland who was assaulted by Antifa, willfully assaulted. I mean, they really picked specifically, they didn't like the fact that he was revealing the truth about Antifa and all the crazy people and the terrible, nasty organization that it really is. And because Andy kept exposing the truth about these guys, he was targeted and attacked and physically assaulted, and it injured him. And so he finally had this lawsuit. There were two elements to this lawsuit that were interesting. The jury trial was really tough because Antifa threatened the jurors. Basically, the defendant's attorney outed the jurors, and probably broke all kinds of bar rules and But of course, they're leftists, so that's what they do. They just break the law. They don't care, and they were doing terrible things actually to these jurors to threaten them, and that led to a lot of threats. And so the jury pool was terrified, and they basically didn't award Andy Ngo what they should have awarded him. Now, at the same time, the judge there was another case. I think there was a related interlock case, and there was a judge that did award some fines against the people that attacked Andy Ngo there. But it's actually a really good case of justice denied in an environment like this, like Portland, where I think it's becoming increasingly unlikely that you can get a fair trial. And Andy Ngo's case, in many ways, exemplified, I think, this collapse in the rule of law in these types of environments, and in particular, allowing the Antifa crews to threaten the jurors the way they did in an already very difficult legal environment really produced just a terrible situation. Now, Andy Ngo had come out, and I think I've mentioned this in one of my other videos about him clearly not getting a justice at all in the legal system in Portland. He got a little bit the way the judge ruled later for him on some fines against those guys, and of course they won't ever probably pay it. I'm sure they'll become fugitives, but it's really this is just a disaster. So it's worth paying attention to that, I think, more and more. There's another question. Eric has a question here. I just happened to catch this. Usually if you say @We the Government, it's a little bit easier for me to spot it here. I often hear that MH decline is cut of Reagan. Can you help me better for mental health? Can you help me better formulate a better conversation other than how long has Olympia been blue? Thanks. Yeah, good question. I mean, there's obviously, it's the Republicans in Olympia have oftentimes been very weak in a lot of areas. The one area that they've actually been pretty consistently differentiating themselves, I think, from the Democrats, or at least the majority of Democrats in Olympia, is their desire to actually have a solution on the mental health side of things. So you're right. It's not enough to just say, hey, the Democrats hate solving the mental health crisis. They seem to want more of it, so they're not going to fix it. Probably true, but by itself, that doesn't necessarily discuss the policy changes that are worth discussing here. We need a path for mental health patients that are a danger to themselves and society around them, that we have some way of putting them in a safe environment where they're not going to hurt other people. At a bare minimum, they're not going to hurt other people, and preferably in one that's also safe for them. And for those who can recover, great. For those who can't, at least controlled in a way that they're less likely to be hurt by others or be able to hurt themselves either. But mostly it's about hurting other people. And you can't just keep throwing these people out on the street. There's nothing good about that. So anyway, so I think that's one of the problems that we have. And there's a distinct – so that approach, by the way, probably requires addressing Western State Hospital and running it like a real facility and not a clown show. It involves probably firing upper management there who are just horrific. They seem to pick the worst people in the state purposely and put them in charge of that department. You need to find some people who are actually knowledgeable about mental health. And this comes directly from employees who work there, many employees that I've spoken to. They're frustrated more than anybody else. They actually do care about trying to solve the problem or at least find solutions for the patients they have. And instead what you have is just these people that seem to want to impress. It's almost like serving their time causing damage so that they get rewarded by Governor Inslee or before him, Gregoire. They just reward the worst and then don't try to fix the actual problems they have in these agencies. There was another question here from Greg. Is there any freedom and liberty group that recommends good candidates or at least give some reasons for people to support candidates? Great question. Not consistently in our state, not a local level. Yeah, you'll generally have people, the partisan affiliation at the state level on up, so from the legislature, say, on up to statewide candidates, you can probably sort out there where those politicians stand for the most part. But when you get lower than say, statewide office, it gets a little bit murkier. Part of the reason is that the trend in Washington state has been to go towards nonpartisan affiliated candidates. And the only people who seem to be doing a good job consistently going through and documenting candidates qualifying who they are is mostly the left. So for sometimes I know a lot of people, and I'll do this sometimes too. I'll look at the Progressive Voters Guide, and if the progressives, the progressives claim that's a good person, it's probably a terrible idea. Or Indivisible is another group. Look at who they give a candidate rating of A to, and you know that that's the worst person on the ballot. Somebody they give an F to probably is pretty good in comparison. So there's a counter approach that you could take just by looking at some of those groups. Sometimes you'll get local groups that do a pretty good job vetting those candidates. I know I'm a volunteer executive director for the Citizens Alliance for Property Rights, and we have frequently gone through and rated candidates around the state. Can't rate them all, rate as many as we can. There's a process that we go about doing that, and that is oftentimes pretty good. It's not perfect, but at least you can get a sense of where those candidates stand on property rights. There's also a candidate rating system that the Farm Bureau uses, limited in your perspective of agriculture, and so it's not necessarily rating candidates overall and how good they are, but you'll be able to say, do they just hate farmers and hate rural living, or are they do they support farming at all? Or are they sane? So I think there's some rating that you can get there. But anyway, so I think that's one of the. I'm sorry, I wish I could say there's somebody that does a really good job. Every now and then there's groups that have done that, but it's a lot of work actually to do it, and the left seems to be better funded on candidate rating efforts than anybody on our side, on the conservative freedom side of the equation. So I just think that that's basically was one of the reasons why I don't think you see that as much on our side. So sorry to not be able to help you that. Let's see. Why no civil commit? Eric Johnson. Why no civil commitments? Oh, okay. So you're talking about the mental health issue and civil commitments. I'm not as. I'd have to go back and re-look at some of the other laws. There needs to be a more clear path to civil commitment in Washington State. There really isn't. So that's probably one of the reasons why you'll see more of these people out here. There's and this is a good point. TZ, you brought up something here. Ari Hoffman, great talk show host out of Seattle. He also reported that AG Bob Ferguson instructed Puget Sound Energy not to disclose the reason for its natural gas rate increase to cover the cost of Inslee's cap and trade program. Can we get this changed? Great question, and the answer is yes, you can get it changed, and we should. That's a good example. I mean, Bob Ferguson's office has consistently, and it's funny, a lot more of this exposure is coming out right now as his early days of his AG's race or his governor's race is coming into play, and the focus is kind of spotlighting that. And a lot of the bad things that Bob Ferguson himself has done now over the last 10 years or so are starting to bear probably not the fruit he wants to have bared. His directing his employees to conceal and destroy records related to the Oso landslide, right? Directing his state agency employees and his own employees of the AG's office to conceal records in a terrible case that the state's is having to pay large fines for, related to a DSHS patient. And also the Value Village lawsuit, where Bob Ferguson lost it, trying to throw the whole weight of the state, just torching and attacking this business, losing the lawsuit, and now having to pay a lot of money for essentially prosecutorial misconduct and abuse. Numerous times he's done this now to numerous businesses around the state, that the prosecution is either based on egregious ignorance, an attempt to attack political enemies, an attempt to create political enemies and attack them, or to raise funds for Bob Ferguson's political campaigns by attacking certain people with a kind of following the KGB model, right? Show me the person and I'll show you the crime. Identifying people first and then trying to find a crime to charge them with later. Ferguson's done that so many times now that it's absurd. And it's becoming more public now. A lot of stuff's finally coming out. It takes a few years sometimes for this to start to increase, but that's what's going on right now. And so I think Ferguson directing Puget Sound Energy to demanding, and their utility operated and organized under the Utility Commission. And so I don't know that they would have to follow this. I mean, I think the PSC could say, screw you, we're going to reveal why it's happening. I think they would have that ability, but because they're a utility, they're kind of this quasi-government entity, they exist as a monopoly at the permission of government. And so when the utility commission tells you to do something, if you're that utility, you're afraid to pretty much go against them. Now, this is another example of Bob Ferguson doing what's not in the best interest of anybody in Washington except for political insiders, and it's pretty nasty, right? So that's definitely a terrible thing. There's let's see, there's a question in here where it says, where does that increased gas tax that they levy on us go? That increased gas tax, or the increased cost, there's two things. There's the obvious gas tax itself, which keeps going up. Most of that money just gets sent down it's actually being paid on bonds generally for projects that the state has already spent. And so you're just simply paying off the debt based on projects the state's had. If anybody's driven through I-5 between kind of the South Center area and, say, Federal Way, there's some good projects, I think, that the state's been trying to work on, expanding the freeways, adding more lanes, things like that. Tacoma has also had some big projects. I-90, if you've gone over the I-90 pass, it's much better now than it was 10 years ago, the way they've expanded some of the lanes, and they've improved some of the lanes after the pass, kind of as you're cresting the pass more on the east side. Good projects that need to be done. Did they waste a lot of money? Will they do them? Sure. I mean, that's our state's Department of Transportation. They always waste a lot of money. But at least there are projects that are tangibly useful. Every penny spent on sound transit's a waste of money. It just gets flushed down the drain. Way overpay for everything, and usually getting nothing to show for it that's any good other than just a Taj Mahal kind of projects that will be useless, and they're unused now in many cases. But some of those tax dollars are also going, or the increase that you're actually seeing that results, it's essentially a tax. And this carbon tax system, it's this murky world of bidding on indulgences, equivalent of a medieval age indulgence, saying by businesses saying, I want to pollute based on your definition, and so I'm going to pay for pollution credits, and then the state takes that money, and then they gotta squander that money in all kinds of crazy things, none of which are going to help you driving in the state, none of which are going to help you at all, but they will help insiders get more cash probably for whatever project that they want. So anyway, so that's kind of the way it works, unfortunately. Jason, you have a question. Will we be paying $10 a gallon for gas in Washington? I doubt it, unless inflation really kicks in and the value of the dollar goes to heck even more than it seems to be going. So I'm not sure. I don't think $10 a gallon is a realistic assessment, but it's probably, I could see it hitting $6. Let's see. Bobby got a question here about, did you see the FOIA email from the governor and AG on allowing religious exemptions narrowly? Are we doing anything about that legally? And that's a great question. I haven't seen that. I was aware of that happening. I wasn't sure what that email, which specific email you're talking about there. I'll have to look that up. So I do want to look that up, but I don't have that information. I would anticipate that somebody may do something about that legally, especially if they're foolish enough to try to reinstitute anything again, which, you know, the left seems to be intent on trying to come up with an election variant for COVID, despite and of course ridiculous policies to go along with it. There's still people that wear masks every day. If you just go to in Seattle and Olympia, there's people that wear masks every day as they're going outside. They just love wearing masks, whether they need it or not. It's kind of weird, actually. Jason, you have a question about Ferguson suing gun manufacturers or indicting Trump as he's flailing in his governor campaign. He might try that. Ferguson will probably do anything. I doubt there's anything that he won't do if he thinks it'll help him with his governor's race. The challenge that he's having is that they do surveys. The Democrats are doing surveys, and they know that Ferguson's approval is actually diving. And so nobody really likes Ferguson, especially the more you know him, the less you like him. And so as that's kind of crashing down his likability, I think he's going to become a little more desperate. And that's really what presents the opportunity for somebody else to be governor rather than him. Remember, we're early days on this, so it's just hard to say. Average Geek Joe, can you please do a tutorial on how you come up with so many PDC complaints, Glenn? You've clearly gummed up the PDC machine. Well, I'm not trying to gum it up, but I am filling up the hopper on investigations. And it's really not that hard. I mean, listen, we got a reasonably good disclosure system in Washington State. in order to do a good job, I think, filing a PDC complaint or at least documenting it, what you have to do is you first need to understand the law. RCW 4217A. You can look it up. That's the statute. Obviously, I haven't memorized because I do a lot of complaints. So number one, know the law and understand the law. And then understand the process of running a campaign and what would be significant for somebody to violate. So read that law. Also, I find looking up the WAC, which is WAC 390, subsection 16 and subsection 18 are worth looking at. There's a couple others in there. 16, if you look at some of my complaints, WAC 390 16037 is like a common violation that I find, failure to provide details on certain types of expenditures related to advertising. And so I find certain types of violations, and then I'll say, okay, what would that violation look like? And then I'll go back and I'll find them. Recently, the complaints that I filed, and as it relates to late reporting, have been pretty significant, and the violations have been large. And so what you have to do is you have to look at when track the filed documents, C4s and C3s. C3s are documents that are filed relating to how much money you've collected as a campaign or a PAC or a candidate, and C4s are how you spend your money. What I find is that most campaigns are, because the ORCA is the system that the PDC has there for entering data into the website, it actually has some pretty good self-check features in it that prevent treasurers from making most violations that we used to catch more often. So this is good, actually. You're reducing the amount of violations that they have. The PDC also has what they call group enforcement actions on people that don't file C1s, which means they don't register the PDC in the first place when they declare their candidacy, or they don't file financial affairs documents at all. And those group enforcement actions have generally improved. In fact, I got a fine for that, perfectly legitimate. I earned it back when I was on the school board because even though I was reasonably knowledgeable at the time, and I had gone through the PDC process before when I'd run for assessor, I filed my F1 in the beginning, but I didn't file it again later on once I was in office. Mistake on my part. And I got a fine for that. I earned that fine by breaking the law. So I went back in, I corrected it, and I went back in. I'd never been to a hearing. This is years before I started filing complaints, and so I just went into the hearing process. You can still see it. That fine is still up there on the PDC enforcement case list, and I totally earned it. I violated the law. And it wasn't a big fine. It was a $100 fine or something. But I did go through the whole hearing because I was kind of curious to see how it works. And so that group enforcement mechanism that they use is pretty good, at least in generally getting most people to kind of comply with those laws. Now, listen, if you don't like the laws, that's fine. There's a lot of laws I don't like that they have. And but again, I'm trying to find these violations. And so it takes some work just going in there and looking at it. But a lot of times what I'll do, for instance, there's a complaint, none of these have posted yet, but I found a PAC out of Snohomish County, a firefighter union PAC, that had literally just concealed everything they did for years. And then they finally filed some documents. And when they filed those documents, I realized, and I was just double checking some things. And so in the process of me drafting a complaint against that group, I realized that 3 of the people that they gave money to never reported those funds. One of them was a mini reporting campaign that took more than the minimum, which was if you're a mini reporting, you can only take $500 from any one source. And so they took $1,500 from this group, but they never reported it. So clearly that guy was a fire commissioner up there. He broke the law. So one complaint that I was planning to draft actually turned into 4 because I identified 3 other violations while I was looking at that complaint process. So that only works if you understand what the statute is and what the rules are. So you just simply memorize those rules, and that helps you as you go through it. And after that, it's mostly like pattern recognition. You can essentially just simply look through large piles of data, and you can skim through it pretty fast, and things will just pop out at you because they don't look right. Now, sometimes you look at them and you look closer, oh, there's nothing to see there, and you can move on. But frequently you'll just find stuff and you'll say, oh, that's right, that's a violation. That's clearly a violation. And so that's why I'm able to file so many. And frankly, it's probably stuff that it's boring to most people. And so they're not going to do it. They're not going to be interested. Maybe I wouldn't have been either in the past, but I got interested when I was having big fights back in 2016 with a bunch of lawsuits on me and complaints that were filed on me, and that's when I really started getting engaged and involved in it. And I was annoyed with Bob Ferguson at the time abusing the campaign finance laws. and then I was kind of baited into it by Senator Sam Hunt, who's a Democrat senator out of the Olympia area. And so really those three things really motivated me to get involved and engaged. And so you just simply do the research and get up to speed on it, and you can become pretty effective. And I think if you doubt me, just go look at the enforcement page of the PDC, and you'll see that there's a lot of complaints. There's a lot more, by the way, they haven't posted yet. They're trying to catch up. So you'll see another 40 or 50 or probably 100 some odd more in the course of the next month, I would guess. It kind of depends. Part of the process is finding the violations is one thing. I have a lot of them that I found. Processing a professional complaint, it takes a little bit of time. So I do have templated, clearly, if you look at my complaints, I have templated letters that I essentially do in Word, and I document, and I change the content to fit the pattern of the violation. And I file. That just makes it a little bit faster for me to copy and paste it into the complaint form that the PDC has. So that's part of the process you go through. So if you're interested in doing that kind of stuff, I'm happy to train people to do it. I've trained a lot of people on how to do it, but a lot of people, it's tedious, right? It can be. And so if you're not into that type of work, it's not going to be interesting. So I don't want to fit a round peg in a square hole. If that doesn't fit your interest level, do something else. And so I'll teach people, I think, how to be more efficient and effective with whatever they do, but it's going to take some work. TZ, how's a lawsuit against Jay Inslee going about Senate Bill 5599, state-sanctioned kidnapping? That was about a week ago. Well, it's filed, right? So there's unless you've been to court, I have to explain something to you. It's not fast. You file. I've been in court a lot, sued and filed my own lawsuits. And what happens is it's a hurry up and wait program. The hurry up is getting the thing filed. Then once it's filed, it takes forever. There's hearing dates, there's discovery, there's all kinds of things. I've had cases last for more than 4 years. So it's like watching paint dry. You're not going to see a lot of action on lawsuits. And that's just the way it is. There's a question here about who is running against Ferguson, and there's a number of, by the way, I posted some videos up about this on just the update on the Attorney General's race. Biggest leaders right now on who's running against Ferguson comes down to, on the Democrat side, you have Hillary Franz, and you have the 5th District state senator, who's also running. Why am I blanking on his name? Oh, that's funny. I'm kind of blanking on his name. I've done a video and I blank on his name right now, but I'll remember in a few minutes. And then you have 2 Republicans, Semi Bird, who's running out of Eastern Washington, and Dave Reichert, who's the former 8th Congressional the congressman for the 8th Congressional District, and also the former King County sheriff, best known for capturing the Green River murderer. And so those are the people running against him. And so that's just, you have a 5-way race right now. Probably it's going to become a 4-way race before the primary. There's another 15 or so people that have filed their name in the hat, but they're not serious candidates. And so track that race. And I'm sure I'll be doing another video about it pretty soon. What is the biggest boondoggle? Question from Jason. What is the biggest boondoggle that Sound Transit has done, in your opinion? Well, other than just, Sound Transit's been a scam from the beginning, and it's unfortunate. And part of this has to do with, there's always going to be some kind of a public transportation system that exists in Seattle and in urban areas. And it makes sense, right? Especially buses. I think you can make a really good argument for why buses and van pools could exist. And they're adaptable, right? So as changing patterns of residency and business and work flow things change, you can change bus routes, change bus stops. You can change a lot of things with buses that make sense. Sound Transit is basically one big scam of 19th century technology that somebody's trying to pretend is new in the 21st century, and then spend inordinate amounts of money building a massive infrastructure, especially transit-oriented development, which is just a big modern urban planning kind of approach to how to kind of rack and stack and population density kind of things. It's a big scam, and so it's just a silly process, and so and it's disastrous. and squanders billions of dollars. And so basically convincing, gerrymandering the district so they can get a vote to approve their big tax increase is a classic case with ST3 in particular. And every penny of that money is wasted. It's a big scam. And mostly what happens is each Sound Transit, whether it's ST1, 2, or 3, and then I'm sure they'll have a 4 at some point in time, each one fails in its primary objectives that they've sold to the taxpayer. So they get their money, they go into debt, they don't get anywhere close to what they promised, of course. So then they need a new one to come up just as that debt is going to about ready to crash that system, so they can use the new money to pay off the old money and roll the debt forward, and then not fulfill those promises either. And then they did that a third time. The third time, now remember, they lost a tax vote on this, and so the third time is actually the one that we're dealing with right now. And they learned from losing one of their votes that they gerrymandered the district that actually could vote on it. So anyway, it's just a ridiculous situation, and there's nothing good about Sound Transit. It's just been a scam from the beginning. So let's see. Let me look down here. Somebody threw some questions in here. Do you think, Jason, again? So again, if you're putting up a question, just try to say "at We the Govern," so it's easy for me to spot it in the list here. Do you think it's possible for Trump to get a fair trial in Washington, D.C.? That's kind of a joke question. Of course it's not. There's no way. None of us would ever get a fair trial in Washington, D.C. If you had any idea that you wanted honesty in government or transparency, or you're a Republican or you're conservative or you're libertarian, God help you, there's no scenario where you'll ever get a fair trial in D.C. I actually don't think you'd have an easy time getting a fair trial in most urban environments, but especially in D.C. So anyway, I think that's a real issue. Thanks for the comments, Jonathan, about the Office on Video setup. It's looking very professional. Love it. Yeah, I can't take any credit for it. My guys helping me here have done a really good job. I do like this setting. So if you like it, I think I'm going to try to use this setting as much as I can. When do we vote to exclude sound? Eric, when did we vote to exclude a sound? I don't know what you're talking about there. Let's see. Bobby, I decided to run for governor of our state as a citizen. Do you think the people of the state are ready for that? Well, nobody's going to care if you want to run for governor. Go ahead. You can pay your filing fee, and nobody will even know you ran. Although you will be in the voter's guide if you're willing to pay the money to do the filing fee. It's not about people being ready for you. It's about whether anybody will even know you did it. So, again, I think one of the things about this is you just simply have to have, if you're going to run for office, try to make it so that it's not the absolute amateur hour effort. Think of marketing, and campaigning for office is just marketing, mostly. And so just because you put your name in the ballot and you file and run for office, it means nothing. It doesn't mean there's no real benefit you're going to get out of that, other than if you do a really good job in your voter's guide statement, you'll probably get a little bit more votes. But if you have no money to promote yourself, especially for a statewide office, it's just a silly waste of time. If you are serious about it, spend a little bit of time doing your homework ahead of time and come up with a team and a plan to actually win. And try to win at a smaller race first, so that you get a sense of what the process is like. Everybody wants to start a company and have it turn into Google tomorrow. Or Microsoft, but that's pretty unrealistic. You are probably going to find out that you're better off to start a smaller business and grow it and learn your lessons in that process before you're ever going to go out and start something really big. And so politics is that way. What happens is people make the news because they're the retired truck driver who wins the state Senate race in New Jersey, and then everybody thinks that they can do it too. Or they'll say, great, that person who holds that current political office is a total clown and a moron, and so therefore, since they're such idiots and I'm so much smarter than they are, or I'm at least not as stupid as they are, I should be able to run and do. Well, that's not really how it works. I mean, just because they're idiots, listen, if that was the criteria for getting rid of people in office, we would have very few people in office today. So you have to recognize that you have to somehow reach out and let everybody know what's going on. Anybody who's probably on this video right now or watches this in the future, you can think of a lot of things that if you've done a lot of homework on some subject, that you're pretty familiar about that subject, and then you're surprised, or you might be surprised at how ignorant everybody else is around you about it, because they haven't done that same kind of homework or they don't have that same experience. how do you expect somebody to know you're running for office unless there's some marketing campaign that really gets your name out there? So that's not as hard, right? I think it's very difficult. So um, unless you really have a plan. So have a plan. A lot of money buys you a lot of marketing. A lot of people, a lot of connections buys you a lot of marketing. A lot of experience in some way that gets you out there buys you a lot of marketing. Marketing is about getting your name out there. Anyway, so that's, sorry, I totally went off on subject for that, but that's just one of the things. I try to train people to run for local office and start with if you can't win your school board race, you're probably not going to win governor, just as a little hint. Pamela, it's funny you're saying hire somebody as smart as me. No, it won't matter how many smart people you hire. That's not going to help you get elected. And hiring me wouldn't help you get elected necessarily, right? It's about really looking at the whole thing and saying, do I have the ability to market myself in a way where I can contact everybody, or at least enough people, and then convince them, sell them on why I'd be the right person to run for that position. So anyway, I think it's important. And running against people like Patty Murray without a significant plan or without having the whole network, it's really a challenge. It takes a lot of work. Let's see, Jason, what other gun control bills do you think they'll be able to ram through next year? My guess is they won't do any, mainly. But the main reason why I'm saying that is more, it's not because they probably won't want to. It's just that there's a lot of other things going on, a lot of chaos coming on. And I suspect, here's the thing. Every time there's a legislative session, the real fight that goes on isn't the drama of these types of laws. It's mostly the budget. The budget is where the real fight is at in Olympia. And the Republicans are aced out of the budget because they don't, the Democrats are making and negotiating all the budget deals behind the scenes. And so that is the real debate that's going on. So all the grifters, all the con artists, all the political connected people that plan on profiting from the budget, that's where they focus all their energy on that. These other things mostly are to distract us. Now, they can be terrible policy and produce bad ideas. But anyway, so let's see. There's a question about why ST1 hasn't reached Tacoma South Sound. It's a question from Eric. Well, because Sound Transit lied to you and they don't plan to really do much to help you. That's just how it works. Pam, you have a question here about how do we get more conservatives to run for political office. I think that you have to, people who want smaller and less government don't tend to want to be involved in government. It's common sense. And it's a problem because then what happens is you basically surrender who is it then that gets elected to these local offices? You get a lot of really bad people who like big government, who think that's the answer. And so you're inevitably going to get a lot of bad people in government. Now, people don't tend to wake up to that until a lot of damage has been done. So the damage is being done right now. And so some people are starting to wake up. And so now is the time we want to get good people running for office. And so I think the decision ends up coming down to the old saying, right? You may not be involved in politics. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be involved in your life. So eventually you want to, as a defensive mechanism, you're going to try to get some good people in there. I think you focus locally first. And if you start to take over and make an impact at a local level, the ability for that to move up for the rest of the state, it can go quickly. It doesn't have to take that long, but it definitely is something that you want to do and get involved in now. Study it, study the office, study the positions ahead of time, do your homework, and see where you go from there. Jason, you had another question here about what other indictments you think Trump will get. Do you think they can get that number up to 100? I don't know. Maybe they're going to try to get as many indictments. I've never seen anything like this, by the way. Nobody in living history ever has. This is a bizarre world. The volume of lawfare really being directed at a presidential candidate. It's never happened before. And it's a bigger problem than Trump, right? Because if this is successful in keeping Trump off the ballot, the problem is it sends a invitation to the left to simply do this again to whichever fill in the blank. It's whoever's coming up next. And that's kind of the plan. Nobody's ever done anything like this. And so I think they're testing this out right now on him. And Trump doesn't even matter anymore. It's the fact that this is the approach that they're taking. And so can you go and can he still prevail against all of that? I don't know. But if he does, one of the upsides would be I don't think people would do that so much anymore to the people in the future. Jack, get a question. Will Inslee use emergency powers again before he's out? Maybe. I don't think that's likely, but then again, I don't know what the plan for next year if they're trying to distract people. So we'll have to see. There's a question here from Gundog55. Where do you think Inslee will end up after he leaves office? I don't know, but I bet it's an Enviro group, most likely, that's going to pay him big fat checks. Probably something related to the carbon tax is what I would guess. And so he's going to be rewarded for the abuse that he's inflicted on the people of Washington State, or somebody's given him some high-paying job. That's usually where it is. And we'll see which one it is. I'm sure it'll be a scam. Why are people obsessed with masks is a question from Jason. Well, I think that people are obsessed because it's a virtue signaling behavior, right? It's masks really are more about just signaling that you're virtuous. It's like wearing a rainbow flag or putting a BLM sign in front of your house. It's a meaningless gesture, doesn't mean anything, but it makes you feel like you're virtue signaling and showing that you're one of the cool kids and you're better than everybody else. So of course then they're going to use that as kind of that that kind of indication that that's who you are. And on the left, that really matters a lot. Virtue signaling in particular is really important for them, more than anybody else. But, people on the more conservative side will do the same thing, right? We'll wear an American flag. We'll show that we love our country. I used a doorbell, and when I really doorbelled a lot, when I would really be doorbelling a lot of homes, I could oftentimes identify whether I was coming to a Republican house or a Democrat house, or by what they have in front of their house. I mean, it was just easy to see if you're walking up and there's a rainbow flag on the door and they've got some other silly statement or something on the front door, you can tell that's probably a left-leaning house. If they have an American flag out there and, I don't call 911 sign, pretty good idea it's a Republican. If the bumper sticker on the car says that they support life, probably a Republican. Who knows? I mean, it's interesting. You can tell when you go to somebody's house a lot of times. And so virtue signaling, meaning that they're sharing who they are, a coexist sticker on the back, right? Good idea that they're probably a left-leaning person. So anyway, that's, I think masks essentially is part of the deal. Arsenio, you got a question here. Do you think COVID will be used to mess with the elections? Maybe. They certainly will if they think they can get away with it. Anyway, so it's just one of those things. Let's see. There's a question here from Pamela, I think. Give a one distant brick and mortar office example of the campaign network necessary for signs, callers, doorbellers, radio, newspapers statewide. Okay, so here's the thing. I don't think you have a shot in heck at basically running for statewide office in Washington unless you have at least $10 million. And it's just simply a logical math question. There's 7 million people you got to reach out to one way or the other. And how are you going to reach them? Your voter's guide statement is probably the most efficient way of reaching out to them. Getting on a lot of media channels would be helpful too, whatever's left of the media. But if you have an R next to your name, they're going to basically ace you out and not let you go there. You're not going to be able to use social media the way you think you can, no matter how much business social media savvy you think you have, because the minute you become a potential political threat, they're going to immediately shadow ban you and cut you out. And you'll be wondering why exactly it is that those numbers aren't going anywhere. So that means that you have to have a physical infrastructure of some kind, some way of reaching out and talking to people or contacting them. That costs money. It's not free. Even if all you did is you printed a handout for 15 cents that's colored, and it's about 15 cents. You could probably do that for now. And it really does a great job promoting you and your message. And you were to go out and get people to drop that off at somebody's front door. So you cut out everything, no postage, just go straight to their front door. And you could do that for 5 million people each time. Do you really think you could do that for less than, say, 50 cents a house? Because you're going to have some costs associated with getting your volunteers out there and distributed, and you really would have to have an army of volunteers. You wouldn't be able to do it for less than 30,000, 40,000 people. Very hard to get that kind of volume of people to commit on their days that they would otherwise be with their kids or at the bar or working extra hours or mowing their lawn or doing something else that's important to them, right? Or watching Netflix, for God's sake. And then getting them to come out and do that for you, that is not an easy equation. It just isn't. One of the amazing things about Trump, and I think that people lose this a little bit in their hyper-partisan sort of angle, is that Trump was able to inspire a massive turnout of people who I just don't think would have turned out that way for any other politician. And on kind of the Never Trumper crowd, they don't recognize this phenomena that's been associated with him in a campaign. I went to a number of events in 2020 that were amazing, and the people that were there, it's a real interesting thing to see just exactly how many people would turn out and be motivated to turn out for him. If you have the ability to inspire people that way, congratulations, because I think you have a potential to run for political office. But you have to have some reason why people are motivated to come out and help you in that way. Very hard to find people who have that ability to motivate large enough people to do that. Let's see. Then there's actually here's a couple questions here, and I know we're getting close to time here, but Jason, you had a question about will BLM be reactivated this next election? Maybe they will if they need it. Those organizations, it won't probably be BLM, it'll be something else, but they'll call it something else. But generally it's the same guys, the people in masks who like to firebomb cities and riot and burn cars. That group will come out when they need them. They've been around for a long time, by the way. If you haven't paid attention to the left, you're not aware of this, but I mean, they've been around for a long time. Now, BLM was a big movement, but this group comes out of the shadows when they need them to. Arsenio, you got a question. Is there a way to charge fees on public lands to prevent homeless encampments? Is there a 5150 mandatory hold that can be used on the mentally ill to clear encampments? The answer to those is probably no. You can charge a fee, but if somebody doesn't have money or they're not going to pay money for that fee, what's the point, right? They like to charge you and I fees because we have assets and they feel like that if we get enough threats in the mail, we'd probably pay it. If you're a drug addict, simply surviving on your next hit of meth or crank, do you really care about somebody telling you need to pay them a fee? You're not going to do it. You'll pay your drug dealers, but you're not going to pay anybody else. The mandatory hold on the mentally ill, I'm not sure the 5150 reference there. I should be, but I'm just not. So I think there's a way that some mentally ill patients can be removed, but it's a disaster trying to get there, and it really needs to be more clear. You really want to have a process that isn't abused you don't want to have a process that becomes a civil liberty nightmare, right? Anytime somebody makes a conservative statement, they must be mentally ill, let's put them in prison, right? The left would love that. So you need to have some process that makes it very clear that they're basically threatening. And that takes some work. Jason had a question, Vancouver deleted the parking spaces in front of Clark College. Yeah, can this be done more to handle the RVs parked in front of houses, or is this illegal? I remember the parking spaces depends on the jurisdiction you're in and who owns them. Yes, that's one of the ways is deleting it. They had some similar issue over by the hospital where they've been struggling with this outside of Olympia, and it's been an issue. Mental health hold. Okay, Eric, thank you for giving me a clarity. 5150 is a mental health hold. I just don't know what somebody does. They don't have enough space in the mental institutions right now, so I don't know what that means. Meet the Bankers takes a great skill set. I ain't running. Yeah, Pamela, you said that. Yeah, now here's the thing. This is why people who have money, a lot of money, have an advantage potentially if they're willing to take a bunch of their own money and commit it to a campaign. And actually, Trump, to some extent, was one of those guys who had a lot of money, but so did Bloomberg, and Bloomberg didn't go anywhere. And Bloomberg, in fact, probably put even more money than Trump did initially, and he was just a joke. You can see that money itself is not enough. Bloomberg couldn't motivate 10 people to vote for him, so even with $100 million. And so Trump has a lot of money, and that gives him the ability to go out and run a national race. But more importantly, Trump had a lot of name recognition just across the board for years and years and years on TV and all the movie appearances and his other activities that he had with wrestling and beauty pageants and just weird other things that he did. You had somebody, everybody knows who Donald Trump was when he ran. I did not take his campaign seriously at all when it started. And what do you have when you're going to run for office that lets you be known like that? There was a candidate one time in a city council race who had been heavily involved in the like the amateur, like the baseball teams locally that would be playing in the park. And so his Rolodex after 20 years of doing that was like 20,000 people lived there locally. He personally that knew him and had interacted with him. And so when he ran for office, his mailing list was massive, and so he was able to generate a large number of people that probably didn't pay attention to local office, but they wanted to vote him in. So those are different ways that you generate a lot of attention. If I jumped into a political race, and I have no interest in doing that right now, but if I jumped into a political race, I would get some advantage because I have a network that I've built up. So I would have more than just 10 people in my neighborhood that know me. It would be larger. It's not enough to win a statewide race, but it would be larger than normal. And so you got to kind of consider this if you're going to run for office. Jason, you're asking a question why. I'm assuming you're saying why is the Republican Party broke, and I don't think they are. But did Ronna McDaniel piss away all the money, and where did it go? I don't know how she spent the money at the national level, but it's always worth paying attention to where that money's spent. Remember, I'm looking through PDC rules. You do learn a lot. So let's see. That's funny. Eric, you mentioned Trump is in 266 rap songs. Yeah, that's kind of funny. It's true. But that's what a candidate has to do. You have to build up a list. So, guys, with that, I'm going to start wrapping this up here right now. I've gone about 14 minutes over. I usually try to do these in about an hour. But I hope you guys like the studio setting. I kind of like this environment. And I think you'll be probably seeing something very similar to this with some of my other videos coming forward. And appreciate all the questions here. If you like this video or you think it's useful, feel free to share it with others. And with that, I think I'm going to close this down. I got some people I got to meet on my way home tonight. And so I hope you found this helpful. And we'll be doing this again next Tuesday. And if you got any other questions I didn't answer this time, save it for then, or just simply put in the comment section. I'll try to respond back to you. So hope it's helping, and we will talk.